Jake Morrison opened his eyes slowly. His head hurt badly. Everything around him looked strange and wrong. The last thing he remembered was working on the mining station near Titan. There had been a bright flash of light and then nothing. Now he was lying on something cold and hard. His arms would not move. He tried to pull them, but they were held down by some kind of invisible force. It hummed softly and felt warm against his skin. Jake pulled harder. The force pushed back, cutting into his wrists. He looked around the room. The walls were curved in ways that made no sense. They glowed with soft blue and green lights that moved like water. Above him, metal arms hung from the ceiling. They looked like spider legs with sharp tools at the ends. Some tools looked like they were made for cutting. Others looked worse. 3 tall figures stood near a wall covered in glowing symbols. They were very thin and their skin was gray and blue. Their heads were too long and their eyes were huge and black. They wore something between clothes and armor that glowed like the walls. Jake had never seen anything like them before. One of the creatures turned and looked at him. It moved toward him in a way that seemed to flow rather than walk. When it spoke, Jake heard no sound with his ears. Instead, words appeared directly in his mind. They felt cold and empty, like ice water poured into his brain. The subject is awake. Brain patterns are normal for this species. We will begin the detailed examination now. Jake tried to speak, but his throat was dry. His voice came out as a whisper. The creature ignored him completely. One of the metal arms moved down toward his chest. The end split open and showed many small tools inside. Sharp needles, tiny blades, things Jake did not recognize. Fear filled his chest like cold water. Jake had worked in space for 15 years. He had survived accidents that killed other men. He had lived through explosions and equipment failures. He was not going to die here on some table while these things treated him like a lab animal. He focused on the invisible bands holding his wrists. They were strong but not completely solid. When he pulled hard, they gave a little bit, like pushing against a strong magnet. The creatures had made a mistake. They thought humans were weak. Jake took a deep breath and pulled with all his strength. The bands cut into his skin. Blood started to run down his arms. The pain was sharp and hot, but he kept pulling. The creatures were still focused on their tools. They did not expect him to fight back. His right hand suddenly came free. The invisible band flickered and went out. Before the creatures could turn around, Jake grabbed the band on his other wrist and tore at it. It broke easier this time. Then he freed his legs. The whole system seemed to fail once he broke the first restraint. The nearest creature reached for him with long, thin fingers. Jake swung his fist as hard as he could. His hand connected with the side of the creature's head. It felt light and fragile, like hitting something made of bird bones. The creature fell backward and a sound like breaking glass filled Jake's mind. Jake rolled off the table and landed on his feet. His body felt weak and his legs shook, but fear and anger gave him strength. The other 2 creatures were moving now. They pressed glowing symbols on the wall. A loud alarm started. It did not sound like a normal alarm. Instead, it seemed to go straight through his bones and make them vibrate. He grabbed one of the metal arms hanging from the ceiling and pulled hard. Sparks flew and strange liquid sprayed out. The arm came free in his hands. It was heavy and awkward, but it would work as a weapon. The second creature tried to grab him. Its arms were long and it moved fast. Jake swung the metal arm like a club. It hit the creature across the body and it went down hard. The screaming in his mind stopped suddenly. The third creature was backing toward a door, calling for help in that same silent way. Jake did not give it time to escape. He ran forward and smashed the metal arm into the wall panel the creature had been using. The glowing symbols exploded in a shower of light and sparks. The door, which had started to open, stopped halfway. Through the gap in the door, Jake could see a long hallway. More of the tall creatures were coming. At least 10 of them. They carried long rods that crackled with purple electricity. These were weapons, and they were coming for him. Jake looked around the room quickly. There were more tables like the one he had been on. There were containers filled with strange liquids. There was a wall covered in tools and equipment. His eyes stopped on a rack holding what looked like weapons. They were different from the rods the creatures in the hallway carried, but they had to be dangerous. He grabbed the biggest weapon from the rack. It was shaped like a long gun but felt warm and alive in his hands. He found what he hoped was a trigger and pointed it at the creatures, forcing the door open wider. When he pulled the trigger, a bolt of bright blue light shot out. It hit the first creature in the chest and it fell down instantly. Smoke rose from the hole in its body. The other creatures stopped pushing on the door. They seemed surprised and confused. Good, Jake thought. They were not expecting their prisoner to fight back. They were not expecting violence. They thought he would just lie there and let them cut him apart. He had worked too hard and survived too much to die quietly. These creatures had made a terrible mistake when they took him. They had grabbed a human, and humans did not give up. Humans fought back. Humans got angry. And right now Jake Morrison was very, very angry. He fired the weapon again. Another creature fell. The rest finally started to back away from the door. Jake used the moment to think. He could not stay in this room. More creatures would come, probably with better weapons. He needed to move to find a way off the ship or station or whatever this place was. But he also needed to hurt them, to make them pay for taking him. To show them that humans were not animals to be studied and dissected. He was going to make these creatures remember what happened when they messed with the wrong person. Jake checked the weapon in his hands. It was getting warmer, almost hot. He saw small lights along the side that were going out one by one. Maybe 6 shots left, not enough to fight through an entire ship of these things. He grabbed 2 more weapons from the rack and stuck them in the belt of the thin medical gown he was wearing. Then he forced himself through the jammed door, scraping his shoulder on the metal. The creatures in the hallway had pulled back around a corner. He could hear strange sounds coming from all directions, clicking and humming and that awful alarm that made his bones shake. Jake Morrison had woken up on an alien examination table. Now he was armed and angry and loose in their facility. These creatures thought they were hunters and he was prey. It was time to teach them a lesson about humans. It was time to show them what happened when the prey fought back. He moved into the hallway, weapon ready, blood dripping from his wrists. The hunt was on, but now he was the hunter. The hallway curved in a way that made Jake feel dizzy. The walls glowed with those same moving lights. The floor felt soft under his bare feet, like walking on something alive. He moved quickly but carefully, keeping the weapon pointed forward. His wrists still bled from breaking free, leaving a trail of red drops behind him. 2 of the tall creatures appeared ahead of him. They froze when they saw him, clearly not expecting to find their prisoner walking free with a weapon. Jake did not hesitate. He fired twice. Both creatures fell before they could make a sound in his mind. He kept moving forward. The hallway opened into a larger space where 3 corridors met. Jake stopped and listened. The alarm was still wailing through his bones. He could hear movement from all 3 directions. The creatures were searching for him, getting organized. Jake looked at the weapon in his hands. It was very hot now, almost burning his palms. The small lights on the side were almost all dark. Maybe 3 shots left. He needed more weapons, or he needed to find another way to fight. He chose the left corridor and ran. His body was tired and weak, but he pushed through the pain. After a minute, the corridor opened into a huge room. Jake stopped and stared. The sight made his stomach turn. The room was full of equipment and machines he could not understand. But worse than that, it was full of bodies. Dozens of creatures from different species, all trapped in glowing fields of energy. Some hung in the air, slowly spinning. Others were laid out on tables. Many were clearly dead, cut open and pinned down for study. Others were still alive but frozen in place. This was a collection. A museum of captured species. The tall gray creatures were studying them, taking them apart to learn how they worked. Jake felt rage building in his chest. How many beings had they taken? How long had this been going on? 3 of the gray creatures were working in the room. They had not noticed Jake yet. He raised his weapon and fired 3 times in quick succession. The weapon kicked hard in his hands and then went dark. It was empty, but all 3 creatures were down. Jake threw the empty weapon aside and searched the bodies. They wore belts with small devices attached. He grabbed everything he could, stuffing the devices into the pockets of his medical gown. One device looked familiar. It had a button that glowed the same color as the energy fields holding the prisoners. He walked to the nearest field where a creature hung suspended. It had scales and 4 arms and looked strong. Jake pressed the button on the device. The energy field flickered and died. The scaled creature fell to the floor hard, gasping and coughing. It looked up at Jake with eyes full of fear and confusion. Jake held up his hands, trying to show he meant no harm. He pointed at the gray creatures on the floor, then at the scaled being, then at himself. "We are the same," he tried to communicate. "We are all prisoners here." The scaled creature stared at him for a long moment. Then it got to its feet. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with muscles that looked like they could tear metal. It moved to another energy field and began working the controls. Within seconds, another prisoner fell free. Jake joined in, pressing buttons and releasing every creature he could. Some fell and could not get up, too weak from their captivity. Others immediately began to run or crawl toward the exits. A few started destroying the equipment, smashing machines with whatever they could grab. One freed prisoner looked like it was made of living crystal. Light seemed to shine from inside its body. Another was covered in thick fur with too many eyes. A third was mostly tentacles wrapped around a glowing core that floated in the air. Jake had no idea what any of them were, but right now they were all allies. The scaled creature came back to Jake. It made a series of clicking sounds and pointed toward a door at the far end of the room. Jake understood. They needed to keep moving. Standing still meant getting caught again. He nodded and started toward the door. The scaled creature followed, along with the crystal being and several others. They moved as a group now, maybe 10 of them total. Some were too injured or weak to come along. Jake felt bad leaving them, but there was no choice. They had to survive first before they could help anyone else. They entered a new corridor and immediately ran into trouble. 6 gray creatures appeared from a side passage. They carried those crackling energy rods and they fired without warning. Purple bolts of lightning streaked through the air. Jake dove to the side and the bolts missed him. But the crystal being stepped forward and something amazing happened. The bolts hit its body and scattered in all directions, reflected away like light bouncing off a mirror. The being seemed to glow brighter, as if the energy was feeding it somehow. The scaled creature let out a roar and charged. It moved incredibly fast for something so big. It reached the first gray creature and simply tore it apart with those 4 powerful arms. The tentacled being wrapped itself around another creature and squeezed until something broke inside it with a wet cracking sound. Jake grabbed one of the fallen energy rods. It was lighter than the weapon he had used before, designed for those long, thin arms. He figured out how to fire it and shot another creature in the chest. It fell without making a sound. The fight was over in seconds. All 6 gray creatures were dead. Jake looked at his group. They had lost 2 members in the fight, but the rest were ready to keep going. The crystal being pointed down the corridor and made a sound like wind chimes. Jake took it as agreement to continue. They moved deeper into the ship. More creatures appeared to stop them, but each fight was short and brutal. Jake and his allies fought with the desperation of cornered animals. The gray creatures seemed unprepared for such violence. They were used to studying helpless prisoners, not fighting warriors. After several minutes of running and fighting, they reached a section of the ship that opened into a huge space. Jake stopped and his mouth fell open. They were standing at the edge of what looked like a hangar bay. Small ships lined the walls, sleek vessels with strange designs. There had to be dozens of them. An idea formed in Jake's mind. These ships probably had fuel or power cells, and fuel or power meant explosions if you damaged it the right way. He raised his energy rod and fired at the nearest ship, aiming for what looked like it might be an engine or power source. The result was better than he hoped. The ship exploded in a brilliant flash of white light. The blast wave knocked Jake backward. He hit the floor hard and slid several feet. His ears rang and his vision blurred, but through the ringing he could hear more explosions. The fire was spreading from ship to ship. The scaled creature grabbed Jake and pulled him to his feet. It dragged him toward a door on the far side of the hangar, away from the spreading destruction. The rest of the group followed, running through smoke and heat and the glow of burning ships. They burst through the door and into another corridor. Behind them, the hangar was turning into an inferno. Jake could feel the heat even through the closing door. He had just destroyed dozens of their ships. He had crippled their ability to move or escape, but he was not done yet. Not even close. These creatures had taken him from his life. They had strapped him to a table and tried to cut him open. They had done the same to countless others. Jake Morrison was going to make them pay for every single life they had taken. He was going to turn their entire facility into a battlefield, and he was going to make sure they never forgot the human who fought back. The corridor they entered was shaking. The explosion in the hangar had done more damage than Jake realized. Cracks appeared in the glowing walls. Strange fluids leaked from broken pipes. The lights flickered and dimmed. The whole ship felt like it was dying. Jake's group kept moving. They had lost 3 more members in the escape from the hangar. Now there were 7 of them left. The scaled creature stayed close to Jake like it had decided he was the leader. The crystal being moved ahead. its light helping them see through the failing illumination. The others followed in a tight group. They turned a corner and suddenly stopped. Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. They had entered a huge room with one entire wall made of clear material. Through it he could see space, but not normal space with stars in the distance. What he saw was a structure so large his mind could barely understand it. It stretched in every direction, disappearing beyond what he could see. Metal and lights and moving parts the size of cities. Hundreds of ships like the one they were on moved through the structure like insects. Some were docking. Others were leaving. All of it moved in patterns that looked planned and organized. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. They were not on a ship in deep space. They were inside a massive facility. A collection station or research complex bigger than anything humans had ever built. Even if they escaped this ship, there were hundreds more around them. The scaled creature made a sound that Jake thought was anger or fear. The crystal being dimmed its light as if hiding. The others moved closer together. They all understood what this meant. Escape was going to be much harder than they thought, but Jake refused to give up. He had not come this far to just surrender. He pointed at the viewport, then made a gesture toward the structure beyond. They needed to understand that destroying one ship would not be enough. They needed to do something bigger. Something that would hurt the gray creatures more. The scaled creature watched him closely. Then it placed one of its 4 hands on Jake's shoulder. The gesture felt almost human. It understood. They were going to keep fighting. Together. Jake turned away from the viewport. Earlier he had seen a display showing a map of the ship. It had shown power lines running through the structure, all connecting to a central core. If they could reach that core and damage it, they might be able to cripple the entire ship. Make it crash into other ships or structures. Cause chaos in the facility. He led the group to a door that should take them deeper into the ship. The door was jammed half open. They had to squeeze through one at a time. On the other side was a narrow shaft going down. Metal rungs lined the walls like a ladder. Jake started climbing down. The shaft was dark and cold. His hands were slippery with blood and sweat. Behind him he could hear the others following. Some climbed easily. Others struggled with the unfamiliar design. But they all kept moving. They climbed for what felt like forever. Jake's arms burned with effort. His wounds had stopped bleeding, but they hurt terribly. Just when he thought he could not hold on anymore, the shaft ended. They emerged into another corridor, this one much hotter than the others. The air itself seemed to vibrate with energy. Jake could feel it on his skin, making his hair stand up. They had to be getting close to the power core. He motioned for the group to follow and moved forward carefully. They rounded a corner and walked right into a group of gray creatures. 8 of them, all carrying weapons and wearing heavier armor than the others Jake had seen. These looked like guards or soldiers. They fired immediately. Purple energy bolts filled the corridor. Jake dove behind a broken panel. The crystal being stepped forward again, its body blazing with light. It absorbed the bolts and reflected them back. 2 of the gray creatures fell from their own reflected weapons. The scaled creature roared and charged straight into the group. It moved like a storm, its forearms striking out in all directions. Gray creatures fell around it. One tried to shoot it at close range, but the scaled being was too fast. It grabbed the weapon and crushed it, then threw the creature into the wall hard enough to leave a dent. Jake fired his energy rod at another creature. The others in his group fought with claws and tentacles and whatever natural weapons they had. The fight was fierce and loud. But within a minute, all 8 guards were down. Jake's group had lost one more member, the furry creature with too many eyes. It lay still on the floor, smoke rising from multiple wounds. 6 of them remained now. Jake looked at his companions. They were all injured and tired. The scaled creature had burns across its arms. The crystal being had cracks running through its body. The others looked ready to collapse. But they were still alive, still fighting. They continued down the corridor. The vibration in the air grew stronger. The heat increased until Jake was sweating heavily. And then they entered the power core chamber. The room was massive and round. In the center stood a tower of crystal and metal that reached from floor to ceiling. It pulsed with blue-white light bright enough to hurt Jake's eyes. Thick cables ran from it in all directions, disappearing into the walls. The air hummed with barely contained power. 5 gray creatures worked at control stations around the room. They looked up in shock as Jake and his group entered. One reached for a communication device. The crystal being hit it with a pulse of light and it fell unconscious. Jake ran to the nearest control panel. He had no idea what the symbols meant, but he started pressing buttons randomly. Warning lights began to flash. The steady pulse of the power core became irregular, faster in some moments and slower in others. The scaled creature joined him. Its forearms moved across multiple panels at once. It seemed to understand the alien technology better than Jake did. Or maybe it just knew which systems would cause the most damage when broken. The power core began to pulse faster and brighter. The humming sound grew louder and higher. Jake could feel the energy building like standing next to a bomb about to explode. The scaled creature was not trying to shut down the core. It was overloading it, forcing it to take more power than it could handle. More gray creatures burst into the chamber, 10 of them, maybe more. They wore the heaviest armor Jake had seen yet and carried larger weapons. They spread out around the room, surrounding Jake's group. The power core released a massive pulse. The lights went out, then came back on, then went out again. The artificial gravity failed and everyone started floating. Jake grabbed onto the control panel and held on tight. The gray creatures tumbled through the air, unable to control their movement in zero gravity. Then gravity came back suddenly, twice as strong as before. Everyone crashed to the floor hard. Jake felt the impact knock the air from his lungs. The scaled creature kept working the controls even as the ship shook and groaned around them. The creature made a sound, a series of rapid clicks, then pointed toward the door with 2 of its arms. The meaning was clear. Run, get out now. Jake shook his head. He was not leaving anyone behind. But the scaled creature was firm. It grabbed Jake with 2 powerful arms and threw him toward the crystal being. The crystal caught Jake and immediately started moving toward the door. Jake struggled and tried to break free. But the crystal being was stronger than it looked. It carried him through the door along with the other survivors. Behind them, the scaled creature stayed at the controls. Still working, still pushing the power core toward critical failure. The last thing Jake saw before the door closed was the scaled creature looking back at him. It raised one hand in what might have been a wave or a salute. Then there was a sound like thunder, and a wave of heat washed over them. The power core had finally given up and released all its energy at once. The ship was dying, and they were still inside it. The corridors were tearing themselves apart. Metal screamed and twisted. Pipes burst and sprayed hot fluids. The glowing walls flickered and went dark, then lit up again in random patterns. Jake and his 4 remaining companions ran through the chaos, searching desperately for a way out. The crystal being led the way, its internal light providing the only steady illumination. Behind Jake, the tentacled creature floated along, moving faster than before. 2 other survivors followed, beings Jake had not paid much attention to during the fighting. One looked like it was made of living metal. The other seemed to be mostly shadow and smoke, barely solid. They climbed through damaged sections and squeezed past collapsed walls. The ship groaned around them like a dying animal. Jake could feel it breaking apart. The power core explosion had done massive damage, far more than he had hoped for. But that meant nothing if they could not escape. Jake's mind raced as they ran. They needed a ship, something small that they could fly. He had seen those vessels in the hangar before he destroyed it. Maybe there were other hangars. Maybe some ships had survived. They burst into a new section and Jake stopped so suddenly that one of the others crashed into him. They were standing in the observation room again, the one with the huge viewport. But now the view was different. The massive facility outside was in motion. Ships were swarming around their vessel. Some were trying to dock, probably to evacuate the crew. Others seemed to be preparing weapons. Through a side door, Jake could see into what remained of the hangar bay. Fire still burned in some sections. Most of the ships were destroyed. But near the far wall, he spotted 3 vessels that looked intact. They were smaller than the others, maybe escape pods or short-range craft. Jake pointed and his companions understood immediately. They moved toward the hangar, staying low and close to the walls. Gray creatures were everywhere now, running in panic or trying to fight the fires or just trying to escape. None of them paid attention to Jake's group. They had bigger problems. They reached the nearest intact ship. It was sleek and smooth, with no obvious doors or hatches. Jake ran his hands over the surface, searching for a way inside. The crystal being moved past him and pressed its body against a panel. The hull rippled like water and opened up, revealing an interior that looked more grown than built. Jake climbed in first. The space inside was tight, designed for bodies much thinner than his. He squeezed into what looked like a pilot seat. It was uncomfortable and too small, but it would have to work. The others climbed in behind him, finding spaces wherever they could fit. The controls were completely alien. Glowing symbols floated in the air in front of Jake. They shifted and moved in patterns he could not understand. He touched one symbol and it changed color. Another touch and the whole display rearranged itself. This was not going to be easy. The crystal being moved to what might have been a navigation station. It placed its hands on the controls and the symbols began to stabilize. Maybe it understood the technology. Or maybe it was just better at figuring things out than Jake was. Jake noticed a depression next to the seat. It was shaped like a hand, but bigger than human size. He pressed his hand into it anyway. Suddenly, the entire ship came alive. The symbols in front of him organized into something that almost made sense. Views from outside the craft appeared, showing the burning hangar and the facility beyond. A control stick rose from the floor next to the seat. Jake grabbed it and pulled gently. The ship lifted off the deck, wobbling badly. He pushed the stick forward and the ship shot toward the hangar opening faster than he intended. Jake pulled back hard and they slowed, but not before scraping against a piece of debris. Learning to fly an alien ship while escaping an exploding facility was not ideal. But Jake had no choice. He had flown mining shuttles for years. The basic ideas had to be the same. Forward to go forward, back to slow down, side to side to turn. He just had to be very, very careful. The ship lurched through the hangar opening and into the massive interior space of the facility. Jake's stomach dropped as he took in the scale of it. The walls curved away in all directions. Thousands of structures dotted the interior, and everywhere ships were moving. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Several ships immediately turned toward them. Purple energy bolts started streaking through the space. Jake yanked the control stick to the side and their ship spun wildly. He overcorrected and they spun the other way. One of the bolts passed so close he felt the heat through the viewport. The crystal being made a sound like wind chimes and pointed at something in the distance. Jake followed its gesture and saw what it meant. There was an opening in the facility's wall, a huge doorway or portal, big enough for large ships to pass through. Right now it was open, but even as Jake watched, it began to close. The massive doors were grinding shut. That was their way out. Their only way out? Jake pushed the control stick forward as far as it would go. The ship responded with a surge of acceleration that pressed everyone back against their seats. They shot forward, weaving between larger vessels and dodging energy bolts. An alarm started wailing inside the ship. Jake had no idea what it meant, but it probably was not good. Maybe the engines were overheating. Maybe weapons were locking onto them. Maybe the ship was damaged and about to fail. He did not care. They had one shot at this and he was taking it. A large gray ship moved to block their path. It was easily 10 times their size. Jake did not slow down. He aimed straight for it, hoping the pilot would move. At the last second, the big ship veered away, clearly not expecting such reckless behavior. Jake shot past it so close that he could see the glowing symbols on its hull. The doorway was getting closer, but it was closing fast. The gap was already smaller than when Jake had first seen it. He did some quick math in his head. They might make it, or they might be crushed between doors the size of mountains. Either way, they were committed now. More energy bolts streaked past. One hit their ship and Jake felt the impact through his seat. Warning symbols appeared on the display, flashing red. Something was damaged, but the ship was still flying. That was all that mattered. The doorway filled their entire view now. The gap was barely wider than their ship. Jake held the control stick steady, not daring to make any sudden moves. One wrong twitch and they would clip the edge of the door and be torn apart. The crystal being made a sound that Jake thought might be prayer or a goodbye, or just fear. The tentacled creature wrapped itself around a support beam and held tight. The others braced however they could. Jake held his breath as they entered the narrowing gap. Metal scraped against metal somewhere on the ship's exterior. Sparks flew past the viewport. The doorway's edge was so close Jake could have reached out and touched it if the hull had not been in the way. And then they were through. The doors slammed shut behind them with a sound like thunder that shook the entire ship. They had made it. They were out of the facility, alive against all odds. Jake allowed himself one moment to breathe. Then he looked at the displays showing what was behind them. The facility was enormous, a structure that probably held thousands of captive beings and hundreds of research ships. They had destroyed one ship and freed a handful of prisoners. It was not much in the grand scheme of things, but it was something. They had fought back. They had caused damage. They had escaped. And most importantly, they had survived. Now they just had to figure out where to go. The crystal being worked at its console and brought up a new display. It showed a map with thousands of points of light. Star systems, Jake realized. The facility they had just escaped was marked in red. And far away at the edge of the map was a small cluster of systems that looked different from the rest. The being pointed at Jake, then at the distant cluster. Jake understood. That was where humans came from. Home. If this alien could read the ship's star charts, maybe it could help him get back there. It would be a long journey. They had no food that Jake could eat. No water he was sure was safe to drink. The ship was damaged and he barely knew how to fly it. But those were problems for the future. Right now they were free. And that was enough. The first 3 days were the hardest. Jake had to figure out how to keep the ship running while traveling through space he did not recognize. The crystal being helped as much as it could, but they had no common language. Everything was done through gestures and guesses and hoping they understood each other correctly. The ship's systems were failing slowly. Warning symbols appeared on the displays more frequently. Strange sounds came from the walls. The temperature fluctuated between freezing cold and uncomfortably hot. Jake spent hours trying to fix problems he did not understand, using tools designed for hands different from his own. Food was a constant worry. Jake had found storage compartments with what looked like supplies. Some of it might have been food. Most of it looked dangerous or inedible. He tried small amounts of different items, watching his body's reactions carefully. Several things made him sick. A few seemed safe enough. Nothing tasted good. His alien companions had their own needs. The crystal being did not seem to eat at all. It just sat near the ship's power systems, absorbing energy directly. The tentacled creature found something in the storage that it consumed eagerly. The metal being chewed on pieces of the ship's damaged sections, apparently eating the metal itself. The shadow creature simply faded in and out, barely visible most of the time. On the 4th day, they encountered another ship. It appeared on the display suddenly, much larger than their small vessel. Jake's heart raced as he watched it approach. Was it one of the gray creatures coming after them? Was it some other species? Friend or enemy? The crystal being worked the controls and brought up information about the other ship. Jake could not read the symbols, but the being's body language seemed calm, not afraid. Maybe this ship was not a threat. The other ship sent some kind of signal. The displays filled with new symbols. The crystal being responded, touching controls in a pattern that seemed deliberate. The two ships communicated back and forth for several minutes. Then the other vessel changed course and moved away, disappearing into the distance. Jake let out a breath he had been holding. Whatever had just happened, it had ended peacefully. The crystal being turned to him and made a sound like gentle rain. It pointed at the display, then at Jake, then made a gesture he interpreted as positive. Maybe the other ship had given them information, or warned them about something, or just acknowledged their presence. As the days passed, Jake began to understand the ship better. He learned which controls affected which systems. He figured out how to adjust the course and speed. He discovered how to check the ship's fuel or power supply, though he had no way to refill it if it ran out. The ship became less alien and more familiar, though it would never feel like home. The crystal being continued to navigate, following the star charts toward that distant cluster that represented human space. Jake watched the displays, seeing the dots that marked their position moving slowly across the map. It was a long journey. Weeks at least. Maybe months. He tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong before they arrived. On the 10th day, something changed. The crystal being became agitated, its light pulsing rapidly. It pointed at the displays and made urgent sounds. Jake looked and felt his stomach drop. Behind them, moving fast, were 3 ships, and they were clearly following their trail. The gray creatures had found them. They had sent hunters. Jake pushed the controls to increase speed. The ship responded, but the pursuing vessels were faster. They were gaining ground steadily. Within hours, they would be in weapons range. Jake's ship was small and damaged. It would not survive a fight. He searched the controls desperately, looking for weapons or defenses. There had to be something. But everything he tried did nothing or showed error symbols. This ship was not designed for combat. It was a short-range craft, maybe used for moving between larger vessels. It had never been meant for a journey like this. The crystal being worked frantically at its station. The displays changed, showing new information. A map of nearby space appeared with several markers. Most were empty systems with nothing useful. But one marker pulsed with a different color. The being pointed at it insistently. Jake did not know what the marker meant, but he trusted his companion. He adjusted their course toward it. The pursuing ships changed direction to match. They were definitely hunting Jake's group specifically. They were not going to give up. As they got closer to the marked location, Jake began to see something on the displays. There was a debris field in space ahead of them. Wreckage from old ships or stations spread across a huge area. Some pieces were as small as the ship they were flying. Others were the size of buildings. The crystal being guided them into the debris field. Jake understood the plan immediately. Hide among the wreckage. Make it hard for the hunters to find them. Use the debris as cover. It was dangerous flying through a field of floating metal at high speed. But it was better than being caught in open space. Jake wove between the larger pieces of debris, using every bit of skill he had developed flying mining shuttles through asteroid fields. The ship groaned and shook as he pushed it through tight spaces. Warning alarms went off constantly, but they were making progress, getting deeper into the field. The pursuing ships entered the field behind them. But they were larger and less maneuverable. They had to slow down and take wider paths around the debris. Jake's smaller ship had an advantage here. He pressed it, taking risks that made his companions brace themselves. One of the hunting ships got too close to a large piece of wreckage and clipped it. The impact sent it spinning. Jake watched on the displays as the damaged ship struggled to regain control, eventually pulling back and leaving the debris field. 2 hunters remained. The crystal being found something in the debris field and pointed urgently. Jake looked and saw a huge piece of wreckage, maybe part of an old station. It had a hollow center like a tunnel or passage. The being was suggesting they fly through it. The passage was barely wider than their ship. If Jake made even a small mistake, they would crash. But the hunters were getting closer again. He made his choice and aimed for the opening. The ship entered the hollow section at full speed. Metal scraped against metal. Sparks flew. Jake held the controls as steady as he could, making tiny adjustments to avoid the jagged edges of torn metal. The passage seemed to go on forever. His hands were sweating and his heart pounded. They burst out the other side and Jake immediately changed direction, diving down and behind another piece of debris. He killed the engines and let the ship drift, hoping they would blend in with all the other metal floating in space. The 2 remaining hunter ships approached the hollow wreckage. They slowed, clearly uncertain. One tried to follow through the passage but quickly backed out, probably deciding it was too risky. The other circled around searching. Jake and his companions waited in silence. The ship drifted among the debris, powered down, just another piece of dead metal in a field of wreckage. The hunters searched for over an hour, moving through the field in a pattern. They passed close to Jake's hiding spot several times, but they did not find them. Eventually, the 2 hunter ships gave up. They left the debris field and disappeared into the distance. Jake waited another hour before restarting the engines. When they did power up, nothing exploded. The ship was still functioning barely, the crystal being plotted a new course, taking them on a longer route that avoided obvious paths. It would add time to their journey, but safety was more important than speed. Jake agreed without hesitation. As they left the debris field behind, Jake thought about everything that had happened.
He had been taken from his life and turned into a specimen.
He had fought his way free and destroyed an entire research ship. He had freed other prisoners and led them in a desperate escape. And now he was flying through unknown space in a stolen alien vessel, pursued by hunters trying to find his way home. It was not the life he had planned, but Jake Morrison was still alive, still fighting, still refusing to give up, and somehow that was enough. 23 days after their escape, the crystal being showed Jake something on the displays that made his heart race. The cluster of stars representing human space was much closer now. According to the ship's navigation, they were only a few days away from the outer systems where human colonies existed. But there was a problem. The ship was failing. Power levels were critical. Several systems had stopped working completely. The life support was barely functioning. And worst of all, they were running out of fuel. The ship might not last long enough to reach a human station. Jake spent hours trying to fix what he could. He rerouted power from non-essential systems. He patched leaks using materials he tore from the walls. He did everything possible to keep the ship running just a little longer. His alien companions helped however they could. The metal being actually ate some of the damaged components, somehow making the systems work better despite having less material. On the 26th day, they detected radio signals. Human radio signals. Jake felt tears in his eyes when he heard them. Voices speaking English and Chinese and Spanish, talking about cargo schedules and mining operations and all the normal boring things that meant home and safety and civilization. He tried to respond, but the ship's communication system was not compatible with human technology. Everything he transmitted came out as noise or static. He could hear them, but they could not hear him. Jake wanted to scream with frustration. He was so close, right on the edge of human space, but he might as well have been a million miles away. The crystal being worked on the problem. It managed to modify the communication system, changing it somehow to produce signals that might be compatible with human equipment. Jake tried again, speaking slowly and clearly into what he hoped was a microphone. This is Jake Morrison. I am human. I was taken by aliens and I escaped. I am flying a damaged alien ship and I need help. Please respond. This is Jake Morrison requesting assistance. He repeated the message over and over. Hours passed with no response. Maybe they could not hear him. Maybe they thought it was a trick. Maybe they were too far away. Jake kept trying, refusing to give up when he was this close. Finally, a voice crackled through the speakers. It was distorted and broken, but Jake could make out the words. Unknown vessel, this is cargo hauler Destiny. We received your transmission. Can you repeat your identification? Jake's hands shook as he responded. My name is Jake Morrison. I worked for Titan Mining Corporation. I was taken from a station 3 months ago. I am in a stolen alien ship with 4 alien survivors. We need help. The ship is failing. There was a long pause. Then the voice came back, sounding cautious. Jake Morrison, we show you as missing and presumed dead. You are on approach from uncharted space in an unknown vessel. We are alerting military authorities. Do not make any aggressive moves. Transmit your current position and status. Jake gave them everything they asked for. Position, heading, ship status, everything. The crystal being helped him transmit the data in a format humans could understand. Then they waited. The ship's power was dropping faster now. Warning symbols covered the displays. They had maybe hours left before complete system failure. 40 minutes later, new ships appeared on the displays. These were human military vessels, fast and heavily armed. They took up positions around Jake's ship, keeping their distance but clearly ready to fight if needed. A new voice came through the speakers, sharp and professional. Alien vessel, this is Commander Lisa Hayes of the Earth Defense Force ship Vigilant. You claim to have a human aboard. We need proof before we can offer assistance. Be advised, any hostile action will be met with immediate force. Jake understood their caution. He was flying an alien ship from unknown space. For all they knew, this could be an invasion or a trick. He needed to prove he was human and not a threat. He searched the ship until he found something that might work. A damaged panel that could show video. He positioned it to show his face and upper body. The crystal being helped him transmit the image to the human ships. Commander, my name is Jake Morrison. I was born in New Chicago, Mars. I have been working in space for 15 years. 3 months ago, I was taken from Titan Station by aliens who wanted to study me. I fought my way free and stole this ship. These are the other prisoners who escaped with me. We mean no harm. We just want to be safe. There was another pause. Jake waited, barely breathing. Everything depended on this moment. If the humans did not believe him, they might destroy the ship. If they believed him but feared the aliens with him, the same result. He needed them to understand. Finally, Commander Hayes spoke again. Her voice was softer now, less hostile. Jake Morrison, we have confirmed your identity through facial recognition. You match our records. We are reading severe damage to your vessel. Can you maintain your current position? Jake looked at the displays. Power was critical. Systems were failing one by one. Negative, Commander. The ship is dying. We have maybe an hour before complete failure. Life support is barely functioning. We need evacuation. Understood. We are launching a rescue shuttle. However, we need to discuss your companions. You say they are aliens. We cannot allow unknown species into human space without proper protocols. They will need to be quarantined and studied. Jake felt anger surge through him. No, absolutely not. These beings saved my life. They helped me escape. They navigated us here. I will not let them be locked up and studied like the gray creatures did to all of us. They are free beings, not specimens. The commander's voice became firm. Mr. Morrison, I understand your feelings, but I have protocols to follow. These aliens could be dangerous. They could carry diseases. We know nothing about them. Jake looked at his companions. The crystal being who had navigated them safely across unknown space. The tentacled creature who had fought beside him. The metal being who had repaired their ship by consuming damaged parts. The shadow creature who had stayed with them despite being able to slip through walls and escape at any time. They had all risked everything to survive together. Commander Hayes, Jake said carefully. These beings were prisoners just like me. They were taken from their homes and families. They were being studied and dissected. We fought together and escaped together. I know you have protocols, but these are not enemies. They are survivors. They deserve better than to be locked up again. There was a long silence. Jake could imagine the discussion happening on the military ship. Officers debating, checking regulations, weighing risks. The ship's power dropped another level. Warning alarms began to sound. Finally, the commander spoke. Mr. Morrison, here is what I can offer. We will evacuate all of you to my ship. Your alien companions will be given medical care and comfortable quarters. They will not be imprisoned. However, they must remain under observation until we can establish communication and verify they are not a threat. We will also contact the relevant authorities about their status. Is this acceptable? Jake looked at the crystal being. It seemed to understand what was happening. It made a sound like gentle rain and placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. The gesture felt like acceptance. Like trust, it is acceptable, Commander. Thank you. 20 minutes later, a human shuttle docked with the dying alien ship. Jake and his companions transferred over. The moment Jake stepped into the shuttle and felt normal Earth-standard gravity, his legs gave out. Human crew members caught him before he fell. They wrapped him in a thermal blanket and gave him water that tasted like heaven. Through the shuttle's viewport, Jake watched as the alien ship finally failed. Its lights went dark. Its systems died. It began to drift, just another piece of debris in space. That ship had saved their lives. It had carried them across impossible distances, and now it was gone. But Jake Morrison was alive. He was home, or close enough. He had escaped from beings who saw him as nothing but a specimen to study.
He had fought back and survived.
And he had brought friends with him, beings from other worlds who had stood with him when it mattered most. The gray creatures had made a terrible mistake. They had thought humans were weak. They had thought resistance was impossible. They had thought they could take whatever they wanted without consequence. Jake had taught them otherwise. He had shown them what happened when you underestimated humanity, when you pushed too far, when you mistook kindness for weakness and cooperation for submission. The message was clear. Humans were not prey. Humans fought back, and they would never stop fighting for their freedom and for those who fought beside them. Jake closed his eyes and let himself rest for the first time in weeks. He was home. He was safe. And the galaxy now knew what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge. It was enough.